My father introduced me to 300 of Atlanta's elite as a janitor who crawls around in filth. Everyone laughed, especially his new daughter-in-law Tiffany, who covered her nose with a silk napkin as if my very presence was a health hazard. That was the moment I decided to sign the document waiting on my desk. The document that would turn his platinum gala into a bankruptcy hearing. You might want to grab a drink for this one because revenge is best served with a side of total financial ruin. Before I tell you how I destroyed my father's empire with a single signature, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Nia Brooks, and at 32 years old I have learned that blood is not thicker than water. It is just stickier and harder to wash off. Growing up in the Brooks household meant knowing your place. My brother Trey was the prince, the heir, the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the mistake. The daughter who preferred biology books to beauty pageants. The girl who spent her weekends volunteering at animal shelters instead of networking at country clubs. Last Saturday night, the air inside the Ritz-Carlton ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. My father, Dr. Marcus Brooks, was hosting his annual Platinum Gala to raise funds for his new project, the Marcus Eco Hospital. It was a black tie event filled with politicians, investors, and socialites. I stood in the back corner wearing a simple black dress I had bought off the rack years ago. I knew I did not belong there. Not because I was not successful, but because in this room I was invisible. The crystal chandeliers dimmed and the spotlight hit the stage. My father walked out flashing his $1,000,000 veneer smile. He looked every bit the successful plastic surgeon, confident and commanding. Beside him stood Trey, looking like a catalog model and possessing about as much depth as one. "Thank you all for coming," my father's voice boomed through the speakers. "Tonight is about legacy. It is about building a future for the next generation. I am so proud to have my son Trey leading this new hospital project. He has the vision this family needs." The room erupted in applause. I watched Trey puff out his chest. The man could barely balance a checkbook, let alone run a multi-million-dollar hospital construction, but facts never mattered to my father. Only image did. Then my father's eyes scanned the room and landed on me in the shadows. A cruel glint appeared in his gaze. He waved his hand, beckoning me forward. "And we cannot forget my daughter Nia. Come on out here, Nia. Do not be shy." My stomach dropped. I hesitated, but the spotlight swung around, blinding me. I had no choice but to walk toward the stage. The clicking of my heels on the marble floor echoed in the sudden silence. As I approached the podium, I saw Tiffany standing in the front row sipping champagne. She leaned over to her friend and whispered loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "God, look at her hair. It is so frizzy. Does she not own a mirror?" I ignored her and stepped up onto the stage, forcing a smile. I thought maybe, just maybe, my father was finally going to acknowledge my doctorate in environmental science. Maybe he was going to mention that I had just been appointed as the youngest director in the history of the National Conservation Trust. I was wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father chuckled, wrapping a heavy arm around my shoulder, "we all have that one child who marches to the beat of a different drum. While Trey here is following in my footsteps in medicine, Nia chose a more earthy path. She works at a rehab center for stray animals." He paused for dramatic effect. "Basically, she is a glorified janitor. She cleans up after dogs and cats all day. It is messy work crawling around in filth, but hey, someone has to scoop the poop, right?" The room exploded with laughter. It was not polite laughter. It was mocking, raucous laughter. Heat rushed to my face, burning my cheeks. I felt like I was 5 years old again, being scolded for playing in the mud. Tiffany's voice cut through the noise like a knife. From the front row, she cupped her hands around her mouth. "Dr. Marcus, be careful. Do not stand too close. She probably still has dog germs on her." More laughter. My father wiped his hand on his tuxedo jacket, as if he had actually touched something dirty. I stood there trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like cold steel in my spine. I looked at Trey. He was laughing so hard he was doubling over. I looked at my father, who was beaming at the crowd, soaking up their adoration at my expense. Enough. I reached for the microphone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that the Animal Rehab Center was a $10 million federal facility I oversaw. I wanted to tell them that the grant money my father was begging for tonight had to cross my desk for approval. Actually, Dad, I began, my voice shaking slightly, I think you should tell them the truth about my father's hand clamped over the microphone, yanking it away from me with surprising strength. The feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone wince. That is enough, Nia, he hissed, his charming mask slipping for a split second. Do not dirty my microphone with your nonsense. You are embarrassing yourself. You are drunk. I was stone cold sober. Security, my father shouted, pointing at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into a sterile operating room. Please escort my daughter out. She is clearly not well. She has been under a lot of stress lately with her cleaning duties. Two large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. One grabbed my left arm, the other my right. They did not ask me to leave. They dragged me. Let go of me, I shouted, struggling against their grip. I can walk myself out. Tiffany waved at me with her manicured fingers, a wicked smirk plastered on her face. Bye-bye, Nia. Don't forget to wash your hands. As I was hauled toward the exit, my heels skidding on the polished floor, I locked eyes with my father one last time. He gave me a look of utter dismissal, turned his back, and returned to the podium to continue his speech about family values. They threw me out the back door into the loading dock where the dumpsters were kept. The heavy metal door slammed shut, muffling the sound of the applause inside. I stood there in the humid Atlanta night next to the garbage, humiliated, bruised, and alone. But as I straightened my dress and wiped the tears from my eyes, I realized something. My father had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he had thrown out the trash. He did not realize he had just thrown out the only person who could save him. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a notification from my work email. Subject: grant application. Marcus Echo Hospital. Status: pending approval. I stared at the screen and the tears stopped. A cold smile formed on my lips. Pending, I whispered to the empty alleyway. Not for long. The heavy steel door of the Ritz-Carlton service entrance slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the narrow alleyway. The air out here did not smell of expensive cologne and champagne. It smelled of wet cardboard, stale grease, and the exhaust fumes of idling delivery trucks. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering in the cool night air, not from cold, but from the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I expected the security guards to return, perhaps to toss my purse out after me, but the door opened again, and this time it was my father. He stood on the threshold, bathed in the warm, golden light spilling from the hallway, looking like a king refusing to step into the mud of the peasant world. He did not step onto the dirty concrete. He would never risk scuffing his Italian leather shoes. Instead, he reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his money clip. He peeled off a single bill, crumpled it in his fist, and tossed it at my feet. It landed in a puddle of dark, oily water. Take a taxi, he said, his voice devoid of any fatherly warmth. Go home and wash that smell off yourself. You are ruining my appetite. I looked down at the bill floating in the muck. It was a $50 bill. Ulysses S. Grant stared up at me through the grime. To my father, this was nothing. It was pocket change. It was a way to make me disappear. But as I stared at that number 50, the alleyway faded away, and I was transported back 10 years. I was 22 years old, standing in the hallway of our sprawling family estate. My mother lay in the guest room, the room he had moved her into because her coughing kept him awake at night. She was dying of cancer, and the pain was eating her alive. I remembered begging him, crying so hard I could barely breathe. I asked him for $50 to buy the extra-strength pain medication the insurance refused to cover. Just $50 to give her a few hours of peace. He had looked at me then with the same cold eyes he had now. She is terminal, Nia, he had said, checking his watch. Why waste $50 on pills that will not save her? It is just bad economics. My mother died that night screaming in agony until her heart finally gave out. He saved his $50, and I lost the only person who ever loved me. Slowly, deliberately, I knelt in the alleyway. The dirty water soaked into the hem of my dress, but I did not care. I reached out and picked up the wet bill. My hands did not shake. I was not picking it up because I needed his money. I was picking it up because it was the receipt for his cruelty. My father let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Look at you," he sneered, adjusting his diamond cufflinks, "scrounging for cash in the dirt. You really have no dignity, do you? I always knew you would end up like this. A scavenger." I stood up, squeezing the dirty water from the bill, and looked him straight in the eye. "I am not a scavenger, Dad," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am a memory keeper, and I remember everything." He rolled his eyes. "Save the drama for your animals. Speaking of which, you should enjoy playing in the mud at that shelter while you can." "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked. He smiled, a predatory grin that showed too many teeth. "It means I made a few calls to the city zoning council this morning. Money talks. Nia and yours whispers while mine roars. That land you work on, the one you love so much, it is being rezoned for commercial development next month. My new hospital needs a parking lot, and your little zoo is sitting right on top of it. I am going to bulldoze it, Nia, every last cage." The breath caught in my throat. He was not just content with humiliating me. He wanted to destroy my sanctuary. He wanted to pave over the only place where I felt safe. "You cannot do that," I said. "That is protected land." He laughed again, turning his back on me. "Watch me. Go home, Janitor. The adults have business to discuss." He stepped back inside, and the heavy door slammed shut, locking me out of his world once again. I stood there in the silence, clutching the wet $50 bill until my knuckles turned white. He thought he had won. He thought he held all the cards. He was going to destroy my work, my passion, and my peace, all for a parking lot. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. To build his eco-friendly hospital, to get the zoning permits, he bragged about he needed federal grants. He needed the specific approval of the National Conservation Trust to certify his project was environmentally sound. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I wiped my hand on my dress and pulled it out. The screen glowed in the darkness. It was a text message from Sarah, my executive assistant at the Trust headquarters in Washington, D.C. The message was short. "Director Brooks, the $10 million grant application for the Marcus Eco Hospital just landed on your desk. The board is waiting for your signature to release the funds. Do you want me to approve it?" I looked at the closed door, then down at the phone. A cold calm washed over me. I typed back 2 words. "Not yet." The morning sun had just begun to burn off the mist clinging to the Blue Ridge foothills, and for a brief moment the world felt peaceful. I was out by the rehabilitation enclosures preparing the morning meal for Apollo, a bald eagle recovering from a broken wing. This was my sanctuary. The smell of pine needles and damp earth was infinitely better than the sterile chemical scent of my father's plastic surgery clinic. But peace, as I had learned, was a luxury my family refused to let me afford. The silence was shattered by the aggressive roar of an engine. I turned to see a silver Porsche Cayenne tear up the gravel driveway, scattering stones and dust into the clean air. It skidded to a halt right next to the authorized personnel only sign, the driver ignoring it completely. My stomach tightened. I knew that car. It belonged to Trey. My brother stepped out first, wearing a crisp linen suit that cost more than my entire annual food budget for the shelter. He adjusted his sunglasses, looking around with a sneer of disgust as if the very trees were offending him. Then the passenger door opened and Tiffany emerged. She was dressed for a brunch in Buckhead, not a visit to a wildlife center, balancing precariously on 4-inch stilettos as she navigated the dirt path. She was holding her phone up the ring light attachment, blinding even in the daylight. She was live streaming. "Hey everyone," Tiffany chirped, her voice pitching up an octave into that fake sugary tone she reserved for her followers. "Welcome back to my channel. Today, Trey and I are doing a little charity work. We are visiting his poor sister at her, well, let us call it a workplace. She panned the camera around, making sure to capture the oldest shed on the property while ignoring the state-of-the-art medical facility behind it. Look at this place, guys, she whispered theatrically into the microphone. It is basically a slum for raccoons. Can you believe someone actually chooses to work here? It smells like wet dog and failure. I tightened my grip on the feed bucket but stayed where I was. I could not blow my cover. To them, I was just Nia the janitor. If I reacted like a director, they would get suspicious. Can I help you? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Trey did not even look at me. He walked past me, pulling a laser measuring device from his pocket. He aimed it at the eagle enclosure, a red dot dancing on the wood. Just ignore her, Tiffany said to her phone, walking right up to me. She flipped the camera so we were both in the frame. I could see myself on her screen wearing my muddy work boots and cargo pants, contrasting sharply with her designer perfection. Say hi to the fans, Nia, she said, smirking. Or maybe do not. We do not want to scare them away. She looked down at the bucket in my hand, filled with high-quality fish for the eagle. Her nose wrinkled. God, what is that smell? Is that your lunch or the birds? Before I could answer, she extended her foot and deliberately kicked the bucket. It tipped over, spilling $50 worth of fresh trout onto the dusty ground. Oops, she giggled, looking back at her phone camera. Clumsy me. But honestly, it looks better on the ground. It matches the decor. My blood boiled. That was food for an animal protected by federal law. I wanted to tell her that she had just committed a federal offense by interfering with a rehabilitation process. I wanted to tell her that the ground she was standing on was worth more than her husband's entire inheritance, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Pick it up, I said quietly. Tiffany laughed, a sharp barking sound. Excuse me, I do not pick things up, Nia. That is your job. That is literally the only thing you are qualified to do. Trey walked back over, clicking his measuring device shut. He put a hand on Tiffany's waist, finally acknowledging my presence. Leave her alone, Tiff, he said, though his tone was bored, not defensive. She is just upset because she knows what is coming. What is coming? I asked, looking between them. Trey smirked, taking a few steps back to admire the view of the valley. He spread his arms wide as if he already owned the horizon. Dad finalized the plans this morning, he said casually. This dump. It is gone. We are not just building the hospital next door, we are expanding. Dad wants a VIP parking structure right here. He stomped his expensive loafer on the ground, right where I had spent months nurturing native wildflowers. Bulldozers arrive next month, Nia, he continued. Dad is going to flatten this whole place. He said he might keep you on to sweep the parking garage if you beg nicely. But these cages, these animals, they are eviction notices waiting to happen. Tiffany squealed with delight. Oh, a parking structure. That will be so much more convenient for my visits. They turned and walked back to the Porsche, laughing, as if they had just discussed the weather, not the destruction of my life's work. I watched them drive away, dust coating the spilled fish on the ground. Trey thought he was measuring a parking lot. He had no idea he was measuring the blast radius of the bomb I was about to drop on them. I did not have to wait long for their next move. 2 hours after the silver Porsche disappeared down the winding road, a courier van pulled up to the shelter gate. The driver, a man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands, without making eye contact. He mumbled something about a rush delivery and sped off before I could even ask for a signature. I tore open the seal right there in the driveway, the paper feeling heavy and ominous in my hands. It was a court order, or at least it looked like one. The document was stamped with an urgent red seal that read, "Immediate eviction notice." My eyes scanned the legal jargon, my heart hammering against my ribs. It claimed that the National Conservation Trust shelter was in violation of multiple city health codes and posed an imminent biological threat to the surrounding residential area. The demand was simple and brutal. I had 48 hours to vacate the premises and relocate over 50 injured wild animals. 48 hours. It was impossible. Moving a bald eagle with a broken wing or a traumatized bobcat required weeks of planning and permits, not a 2-day notice. This was not a legal procedure. This was a death sentence for my patients. I flipped to the last page and saw the signature at the bottom. It was not a judge I recognized. In fact, the signature looked suspiciously like the scribble of a lawyer my brother played golf with. This was a forgery, or at best a favor called in from a corrupt official. Trey was not just measuring for a parking lot. He was trying to frighten me into submission. He wanted me to panic, to pack up and run, so he could roll in the bulldozers without a fight. I threw the papers onto the passenger seat of my rusted pickup truck and turned the key. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. I was not going to call a lawyer, not yet. I was going to the source. I needed to look my father in the eye and ask him if he really intended to kill innocent creatures just to save on construction costs. The drive to my father's estate in Buckhead usually took 30 minutes, but I made it in 20. As I drove, the sky turned a bruised purple and heavy drops of rain began to splatter against my windshield. By the time I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Brooks family manor, the heavens had opened up. The house sat on a hill, a towering structure of brick and white columns that looked more like a government building than a home. It was the house I grew up in, yet looking at it now, I felt like a trespasser. I rolled down my window, the rain instantly soaking my sleeve, and pressed the intercom button. I waited. The static hiss was the only sound for a long moment. Then a familiar voice crackled through the speaker. Brooks residence. Deliveries are at the side gate. It was Rosa. Dear, sweet Rosa, the housekeeper who had practically raised me after my mother died. She had braided my hair when I was little and snuck me extra desserts when my father put me on strict diets. Hearing her voice made my throat tight. Rosa, it is me, Nia, I said, leaning closer to the speaker. I need to see my father. It is an emergency. There was a pause, a long, painful silence that stretched on while the rain hammered against the roof of my truck. Miss Nia Rosa's voice came back, barely a whisper now. I cannot open the gate. What do you mean? I asked, confusion clouding my anger. Is the mechanism broken? Just buzz me in, Rosa. I have the code, but they changed it. No, Miss Nia, it is not broken. I heard a sniffle on the other end of the line. Rosa was crying. The missus? She gave strict orders this morning, Rosa stammered. She gave me a list of approved guests for the week. Your name is not on it. She said if I open the gate for anyone not on the list, I will be fired immediately. She said no solicitors allowed. Solicitors. My grip on the steering wheel tightened so hard my knuckles turned white. Tiffany. This was Tiffany's doing. She had reduced me, the eldest daughter of this house, to a door-to-door salesman. Rosa, please, I pleaded, desperate now. This is about life and death. I just need 5 minutes with him. He is my father. I am so sorry, child, Rosa wept. I need this job. My husband is sick. I cannot risk it. Please do not make me choose. The intercom clicked off. The line went dead. I sat there in the pouring rain, staring at the imposing black gates. They were impenetrable. I was locked out of the home my mother had designed, the home where I had scraped my knees on the driveway and learned to ride a bike. I got out of the truck. I did not care about the rain anymore. I walked up to the gate and gripped the cold iron bars, peering through the darkness toward the house. The windows of the dining room were glowing with warm golden light. Through the sheer curtains I could see the silhouette of a crystal chandelier. I watched as figures moved inside. I saw my father sitting at the head of the table, raising a wineglass. I saw Trey throwing his head back in laughter, probably recounting how he had scared me with the fake eviction notice. And I saw Tiffany shimmering in a silver dress, presiding over the table like the queen she believed she was. They were eating dinner. They were feasting on roast beef and vintage red wine, safe and dry and warm, while I stood in the mud holding a death warrant for 50 animals. They looked like the perfect American family, a portrait of success and happiness. But from where I stood shivering in the cold, I saw something else. I saw a house of cards. They were celebrating a victory they had not yet won, funded by money they did not yet have. They were toasting to a future that I held the power to erase. I let go of the bars. The rain mingled with the tears on my face, but I wiped them both away with a fierce swipe of my hand. I would not beg. I would not buzz that intercom again. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would become one. But I would not be the stranger who knocks politely. I would be the stranger who evicts them from their own lives. I turned back to my truck. The image of their happy dinner burned into my retina. Let them eat, I thought. It would be their last meal in peace. I had my hand on the door handle of my rusted pickup truck, ready to drive away into the storm when the intercom buzzed again. This time it was not Rosa's trembling voice that crackled through the speaker. It was my father. His tone had shifted completely. Gone was the dismissal, replaced by a smooth, oily command that sent a different kind of shiver down my spine. Naya, wait. Do not leave yet. Come inside. We need to settle this like a family. The heavy iron gates groaned open slowly, inviting me into the lion's den. I knew this was not a peace offering. My father never changed his mind unless he wanted something. I drove up the winding driveway parked next to Trey's Porsche and took a deep breath. I stepped out into the rain and walked up the marble steps where the front door was already open. The warmth of the house hit me first, followed by the rich, savory scent of rosemary roasted beef and expensive red wine. It was the smell of my childhood, a smell that used to mean safety, but now just smelled like betrayal. I walked into the dining room dripping wet, my muddy boots leaving faint prints on the pristine Persian rug. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table swirling a glass of Cabernet. Trey was picking at his teeth with a silver toothpick, and Tiffany was blotting her lipstick with a linen napkin. They looked at me, not with welcome, but with the impatient expectation of predators watching a wounded gazelle limp into a clearing. "Sit down, Nia," my father said, gesturing to a wooden chair that had been pulled up to the far end of the table away from the food. "Rosa, bring her a towel. We do not want the upholstery ruined." I sat, keeping my spine straight. I did not ask for dinner. I knew better. "Why did you call me back?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "You said you were evicting me." My father smiled, a tight, forced expression that did not reach his eyes. He reached under the table and pulled out a leather folder. He slid it across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of me. "I was harsh earlier," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I apologize. I have been under a lot of pressure with the hospital project. But seeing you out there in the rain, it made me realize something. This eviction process is messy. Courts, lawyers, delays. It is stressful for everyone, especially you." He tapped the folder. "So I have come up with a better solution, a solution that benefits us all." I opened the folder. Inside was a single document titled Quitclaim Deed. It was a transfer of property ownership, specifically the transfer of the 10 acres my grandmother, his own mother, had left to me in her will. The land where my shelter stood. "Grandma left that land to me," I said quietly, staring at the legal jargon. "She wanted it to be a sanctuary. She was senile when she signed that will." Trey muttered, pouring himself more wine. "She probably thought she was leaving it to the gardener." My father shot Trey a warning look before turning back to me. "Look, Nia, we all know the truth. You are overwhelmed. Running that shelter? It is a lot of work. Physical work, dirty work. It is not a career. It is a hobby that has gotten out of hand. You are drowning in debt, and frankly, you do not have the capacity to manage a prime piece of real estate like that." Tiffany chimed in, then her voice sickly sweet. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "What your father is trying to say, honey, is that these things are complicated. Property taxes, liability insurance, zoning laws. Those are big words, Nia. They are sophisticated concepts. We know you are good with animals. You know feeding things, cleaning cages. Manual labor suits you. But land development, that requires a different kind of mind. She tapped her temple with a manicured fingernail, looking at me with pity. We just want to take the burden off your shoulders, she continued. You sign the land over to the hospital trust and we will handle the hard stuff. We will even give you a small stipend. You can go find a nice little apartment and get a job that is less taxing on your brain. Maybe cleaning tables or walking dogs. Something simple. Her words were like tiny poison needles. She was not just calling me poor, she was calling me stupid. She was using every stereotype in the book, assuming that because I worked with my hands, my mind was empty. She assumed the black woman in the work boots could not possibly understand the value of the asset she was sitting on. I looked down at the document. If I signed this, I would lose everything. The shelter, the animals, my grandmother's legacy. My father needed this signature because he knew the eviction notice was fake. He could not legally touch the land as long as my name was on the deed. He was desperate. I felt a surge of power. They thought I was the fool, but I was the only one at the table who actually read the contracts. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen my father had placed on the folder. The room went silent. I could feel their eyes burning into me, hungry for the ink that would seal their fortune. I brought the pen tip to the paper. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back my rage. I let the pen hover over the signature line. Tiffany let out a small breath of anticipation. Just sign right there, sweetie. X marks the spot. I stopped. I lifted the pen. I looked up at my father, widening my eyes in a performance of confusion and hesitation. I cannot, I whispered. My father's smile vanished. What do you mean you cannot? I put the pen down. It is just so much paper, Dad. And Tiffany is right. I am not good with big words. Grandma always told me to never sign anything I did not understand. I think I need to take this home. I need to read it slowly. Maybe ask someone to explain it to me. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest like a shield. I need to think about it, I said, backing away from the table. Trey slammed his hand down. Are you kidding me? Just sign the damn paper, Nia. Nia, sit down. My father barked, his face turning red. I am sorry, I said, feigning a headache. I am just so tired from all the cleaning today. My brain is not working right. I will let you know tomorrow. Before they could stop me, I turned and walked out of the dining room. I heard Tiffany screech, "She is going to ruin everything," but I kept walking. I walked out the front door, back into the rain, and climbed into my truck. As I drove away, I tossed the folder onto the passenger seat. I did not need to read it. I knew exactly what it said, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it to bury them. They wanted me to be the dumb janitor, fine. I would play the part. Until the moment I swept them all into the trash. The next morning, I traded my muddy work boots for a pair of Italian leather heels and my canvas jacket for a tailored navy blazer. I swiped my keycard at the private elevator of the National Conservation Trust headquarters in downtown Atlanta. As the doors slid shut and I began the smooth ascent to the 42nd floor, I felt the familiar shift in my demeanor. Here I was, not Nia the disappointment. I was Dr. Brooks, the director, the woman who controlled the purse strings for every major environmental project in the Southeast. I walked into my corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city skyline, and set my latte on the mahogany desk. My assistant Sarah had already turned on the large wall-mounted monitor. "He is on in 2 minutes," Sarah said, standing by the door with a tablet in her hand. "Channel 5, the morning show." I nodded, sinking into my leather chair. "Thank you, Sarah. Hold my calls." I watched as the screen flickered to life. The perky morning show host was sitting on a beige sofa, leaning forward with rapt attention. Opposite her sat my father. He looked impeccable in a light gray suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, projecting an image of benevolent wisdom. So Dr. Marcus, the host, chirped. Tell us about this revolutionary new project, the Marcus Eco Hospital. It sounds fascinating. My father smiled, that practiced, charming smile that had fooled 3 ex-wives and thousands of patients. Well, Linda, he began, his voice smooth as silk. Medicine has always been about healing people. But I realized, how can we heal people if we are killing the planet? This new facility will be the first of its kind. Zero carbon footprint, solar-powered, and most importantly, it will be built in complete harmony with the local wildlife. I let out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed in the empty office. Harmony. He was planning to pave over a federal sanctuary to build a parking deck. The host nodded enthusiastically. And I understand you have secured a location that is quite special. Yes. My father lied without blinking. It is a beautiful piece of land in the foothills. We are actually planning to incorporate a wildlife preservation zone right on the campus. We want our patients to look out their windows and see eagles soaring, to see nature thriving. It is about holistic healing. I gripped the armrest of my chair. He was stealing my life's work, my grandmother's legacy, and repackaging it as a marketing gimmick to sell plastic surgery. He was using the very animals he planned to evict as props for his fundraising campaign. That is incredible, the host gushed. And funding such a massive project must be a challenge. My father nodded solemnly. It is. But we are confident. We have applied for a top-tier grant from the National Conservation Trust. We believe our values align perfectly with theirs. We are just waiting for the final rubber stamp. Rubber stamp. That was what he thought I was. A bureaucrat who would see his last name and blindly sign the check. He had no idea that the person holding that stamp was the daughter he had called a janitor less than 24 hours ago. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. Get me the file for the Marcus application, I said. It is already on your screen, Director. I turned to my computer. There it was. A $10 million grant request. The paperwork was glossy and filled with buzzwords but lacking in substance. Under the section for environmental impact, he had written pending. Under wildlife protection plan, he had written to be determined. He thought his reputation was enough. He thought the rules did not apply to men like him. I hovered my mouse over the reject button. It would be so easy. One click and his funding would vanish. The hospital project would collapse before the first brick was laid. But no, that was too quick, too merciful. He needed to feel the ground crumble beneath him slowly. He needed to believe he was winning, right up until the moment he lost everything. I opened a blank document and began to type. I did not reject the application. Instead, I drafted a formal request for a special assessment audit. This was a bureaucratic nightmare reserved for the most suspicious cases. It required the applicant to provide detailed certified proof of land ownership, soil samples, and a 10-year projection of animal welfare impact. It also required a site visit from a senior inspector. I typed rapidly, my fingers flying across the keys. I demanded proof of the eagle habitat preservation he had just bragged about on TV. I demanded to see the blueprints for this so-called nature zone. I demanded documents I knew he did not have because they did not exist. I finished the document and attached it to an email. I did not sign it with my name. I signed it simply, the Grant Committee. I hit send. On the TV screen, my father was shaking hands with the host, looking triumphant. We expect to break ground next month, he declared. I leaned back in my chair, watching his confident smile. Not if I can help it, Dad, I whispered. At that exact moment, I saw him reach into his pocket and check his phone. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a twitch of the eye. He had received the email, the notification that his rubber stamp had just turned into a brick wall. I took another sip of my latte. The game had officially begun. And he was already losing, he just did not know it yet. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, jagged shadows across the sanctuary grounds. I was kneeling by the creek that ran through the property, checking the water filtration system I had installed myself 3 years ago. The water ran clear and cold over my fingers, a stark contrast to the murky, moral waters my family chose to swim in. It was quiet here, the kind of silence that felt heavy with anticipation, like the air before a thunderstorm. My phone vibrated against my hip, shattering the tranquility. I pulled it out and saw my brother's name flashing on the screen. Trey. I let it ring twice, taking a moment to compose myself to slip back into the role of the beleaguered sister before I slid my thumb across the screen. "What do you want, Trey?" I asked, keeping my voice weary. There was no hello, no greeting, just the sound of heavy breathing and the rustling of papers. "I need you to come over here," he barked. "Right now." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "I am working, Trey. I have animals to feed. I cannot just drop everything because you snapped your fingers. Listen to me, you useless waste of space." He snapped, his voice pitching up in that way it always did when he was panicked. "Dad just got hit with some insane audit from the grant committee. They want soil samples. They want a 10-year wildlife impact projection. They want blueprints for an eagle habitat." I smiled to myself. The audit had landed. So I asked, feigning ignorance, "You are the project director, aren't you? That sounds like your job. I am a visionary." "Nia, I am not a secretary," he shouted. "I do not know how to write this garbage. I do not know the Latin names for squirrels or whatever nonsense they want. But you do. You spend all day rolling around in the dirt with these things. You know the jargon." He paused, and I could hear him taking a swig of something. Probably whiskey. It was only 2 in the afternoon. "You are going to write this report for me," he said, his tone dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You are going to fake the data, make up some numbers, whatever you have to do to get those bureaucrats off my back. You are used to these trash procedures. It is right up your alley." I gripped the phone tighter. He wanted me to commit fraud. He wanted me to use my expertise to help him destroy the very land I was sworn to protect. "I cannot do that, Trey," I said calmly. "That is illegal. And I do not work for you." There was a silence on the other end, colder than the creek water. "You really want to play hardball with me, Nia?" he asked softly. "After everything we are doing for you, we are letting you stay on that land out of the goodness of our hearts." "You are trying to evict me," I corrected him. "Details," he scoffed. "Look, I will make you a deal. You write this report, get this grant approved, and I will convince Dad to let you keep that 3-legged wolf you love so much." "What is his name, Buster? I will let you keep him in the backyard or something." "His name is Baron," I said, my voice hardening. "And he is not a bargaining chip. The answer is no, Trey. Do your own homework." I moved to hang up, but his next words stopped me cold. "Fine, have it your way. But you know accidents happen when people do not cooperate." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I am talking about that creek you are standing next to," he said. "I know exactly where the source is up in the hills. It would be a tragedy if a truck accidentally spilled a few barrels of industrial runoff into it. Just a little mistake. But sensitive animals like yours, they probably wouldn't survive the night if the water turned toxic, would they?" My blood ran cold. He was threatening to poison the water supply. He was threatening to kill 50 innocent animals just to force me to write a grant report. "You wouldn't," I whispered, making sure I sounded terrified. "Try me." He laughed. "You have until tomorrow morning to send me a draft. Or else the only thing your animals will be drinking is antifreeze." The line went dead. I stood there by the creek, the sound of the rushing water suddenly sounding like a countdown. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking with adrenaline. Trey thought he had terrified me into submission. He thought he had found my breaking point. But he had made a fatal error. He assumed I was just listening. I looked down at my phone screen. The recording app was still open, the timer ticking past 3 minutes. I pressed the stop button and watched the file save. Trey Brooks, threat to contaminate federal waterway, MP3. I had him. This was not just family drama anymore. This was a federal crime. He had just handed me the ammunition to put him behind bars, and he was too arrogant to even realize he was holding the gun. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked at the water. "Drink up, little ones," I whispered to the wind. "You are safe. But the monsters are about to drown." The sun set behind the ridge, plunging the sanctuary into a heavy, suffocating darkness. I did not go home to my small cottage on the edge of the property. I did not turn on the lights in the main office. Instead, I sat in the server room, the only illumination coming from the blue glow of the security monitors. Trey had made his threat at 2 in the afternoon. It was now 3 in the morning. I knew my brother. He was impatient, reckless, and he preferred to do his dirty work while the world slept. I watched the screens, my hand hovering over the control panel for the new filtration system I had installed 6 months ago. It was a military-grade setup designed to detect chemical anomalies and seal the intake valves instantly. I had spent my entire savings on it, paranoia whispering that this day might come. Tonight, that paranoia was saving lives. Movement on screen 4 caught my eye. A shadow detached itself from the tree line near the northern perimeter. I leaned forward, my breath hitching in my throat. It was a man dressed in dark clothing carrying a heavy yellow canister. He moved with the clumsy stealth of someone who was being paid enough to commit a crime, but not enough to be professional about it. I recognized him instantly, even in the grain of the night vision. It was Ray, a local mechanic who had done odd jobs for my father's estate for years. Trey had sent a handyman to do a hitman's job. I watched as Ray approached the main water reservoir. This tank fed the hydration systems for every enclosure from the eagles to the injured bobcats. If that poison entered the supply, 50 animals would be dead by sunrise. Ray unscrewed the cap of the reservoir. He struggled with the canister, the weight of it making him stumble before he tilted it forward. A thick, viscous liquid poured into the intake pipe. On the screen, it looked like black sludge. In reality, it was likely industrial solvent or concentrated pesticide. I did not run out screaming. I did not call the police immediately. I needed him to finish. I needed the act to be completed so there could be no ambiguity in court. I waited until the last drop fell from the canister. Then I flipped the switch on my console. 100 yards away, deep underground, a steel shutter slammed into place, diverting the contaminated water into a hazardous waste containment tank. The animals were safe. Their water supply had switched to the backup cistern the moment the sensors detected the toxin, but Ray did not know that. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight and slipped out the side door. I moved silently across the damp grass, the adrenaline sharpening my senses. Ray was just screwing the cap back onto the reservoir, wiping his gloved hands on his jeans. "Hey, Ray," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a whip. He spun around, dropping the empty canister. I blinded him with the beam of the flashlight, keeping the light focused squarely on his face. He threw his hands up, squinting against the glare. "Miss Nia," he stammered, his voice trembling. I was just checking the pipes. At 3 in the morning, with a canister of industrial bleach, I asked, stepping closer. I kicked the empty yellow jug. It rolled across the gravel with a hollow, condemning sound. The smell of chlorine was overpowering. "Trey sent you, didn't he?" I asked. It was not a question. Ray looked around, looking for an escape route, but I blocked the path to the woods. He slumped his shoulders, defeated. "He said he would pay off my truck," Ray whispered, looking at his boots. "He said it was just to make the animals sick. Just to scare you so you would leave. He didn't say it would kill them." "You know better than that, Ray," I said coldly. "That amount of chemical would have wiped out everything within a mile radius. You just committed a felony. Attempted destruction of federal property and animal cruelty." Ray fell to his knees. "Please, Miss Nia, I have kids. Do not call the cops." I looked down at him. If I arrested him now, Trey would claim Ray acted alone. Trey would claim he was just a rogue employee. I needed the chain of command to remain intact. I needed Trey to believe he had won. "Stand up," I commanded. Ray scrambled to his feet, confused. "You are going to leave now," I said. "You are going to get in your truck and drive away. And when Trey calls you, you are going to tell him you did exactly what he asked. You are going to tell him the poison is in the water. Ray blinked, stunned. You are letting me go. I am giving you a head start, I said. But Ray, listen to me carefully. I have you on camera. I have your fingerprints on that canister. If you ever step foot on this property again, I will hand this footage to the FBI. Now go. He did not wait to be told twice. He turned and sprinted toward the tree line, vanishing into the night. I stood alone by the reservoir. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my pocket and carefully picked up the empty canister. This was the smoking gun. I walked over to the intake pipe and used a sterile vial to collect a sample of the sludge before it fully drained into the containment tank. I had the video, I had the weapon, I had the toxin, and by tomorrow morning, I would have a recorded confirmation from my brother believing he had successfully committed a massacre. I looked up at the moon. The animals slept peacefully in their cages, unaware of how close they had come to death. My family had tried to take everything from me. They had tried to take my dignity, my home, and now the innocent lives under my protection. I walked back to the server room to back up the footage to a secure cloud drive. Trey wanted to play dirty. He had no idea that he had just handed me the shovel to dig his grave. The game was over. It was time for the checkmate. The windows of the black SUV were tinted dark enough to hide my identity as we pulled up the long, winding driveway of my father's estate. I was not sitting in the back seat where I usually sat as the director. Instead, I was in the passenger seat clutching a clipboard and a heavy bag of soil testing equipment. Beside me drove David Henderson, my senior inspector. He was a man of few words, a former military engineer who respected protocol above all else. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, not because of the driving, but because he was terrified of the performance we were about to put on. "Director, are you sure about this?" David asked quietly as the house came into view. "I can handle the inspection alone. You do not need to subject yourself to this." I adjusted the oversized glasses I had bought at a drugstore an hour ago and pulled my hair tighter into a severe, unflattering bun. I looked down at my generic gray suit, a stark contrast to the tailored blazers I wore to board meetings. "I need to see it with my own eyes, David," I replied, staring at the looming white columns of the house. "I need to see them lie to my face when they think I am nobody. Just remember today, I am not your boss. I am just the assistant. Treat me like one." David nodded stiffly as we parked. Waiting for us on the front steps was the entire welcoming committee. Dr. Marcus stood front and center wearing a smile that looked like it had been surgically attached. Beside him stood Tiffany, looking bored and scrolling through her phone. We stepped out. My father rushed forward to shake David's hand, completely ignoring me as I struggled to unload the heavy equipment from the trunk. "Mr. Henderson, what a pleasure," my father boomed. "Welcome to the future site of the Marcus Eco Hospital. We are so honored the trust sent their best man." David shook his hand professionally. "The pleasure is mine, Dr. Marcus. We take these special assessment audits very seriously." My father laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. Of course. Transparency is key. We have nothing to hide here, just nature in its purest form." He gestured for us to follow him toward the garden. I trailed a few steps behind, head down, lugging the equipment bag. I was invisible to him, just a faceless worker bee. But I was not invisible to everyone. As we walked past the rose bushes, Tiffany looked up from her phone. Her eyes narrowed as they landed on me. She stopped walking, forcing me to halt abruptly to avoid bumping into her. Well, she drawled, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Look what the cat dragged in." My father turned around, annoyed at the delay. "What is it, Tiffany?" "Look who the inspector brought with him." "Dad?" She pointed a manicured finger at me. "It is Nia." My father squinted at me as if trying to recognize a stranger. Then he snorted. "Oh, I did not recognize you in that cheap suit. What are you doing here? Did the animal shelter finally fire you? Are you carrying bags for a living now?" David stepped in, his voice tight. "This is my assistant, Ms. Brooks. She is helping me document the site today." Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched sound that made the birds in the trees scatter. Assistant. That is a fancy word for servant, isn't it? I always knew you would end up working for someone else's paycheck, Nia, but I guess carrying heavy bags is better than shoveling manure, right? She took a step closer to me. The ground beneath us was soft from the recent rain, and her high heel sank slightly into the mud. She gasped, pulling her foot out. A smudge of brown dirt clung to the toe of her pristine white designer pump. "Oh no!" she cried out, her voice dripping with exaggerated distress. "My shoe! This is Italian leather, Nia. Do you know how much this costs?" "Of course you don't." She looked at me, then at the ground, and then back at me. Her eyes glinted with malice. "Since you are here as the help, why don't you make yourself useful? Clean it off." I froze. The heavy bag cut into my shoulder. "Excuse me?" I asked. "You heard me," she said, pointing at her shoe. "You are the assistant, aren't you? Assist me. Clean my shoe. Unless you want me to tell your boss here how rude you are. I am sure he wouldn't want a complaint filed against his staff on such an important day." I looked at David. I saw his jaw clench, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He was about to speak, about to tell her that she was talking to the woman who signed her father's checks. He was about to blow my cover to defend my honor. I caught his eye and gave a barely perceptible shake of my head. "No, not yet." I slowly lowered the bag to the ground. I knelt in the dirt at Tiffany's feet. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a tissue, and reached for her shoe. "That is a good girl," Tiffany cooed, looking down at me with pure triumph. "You really are a natural at being beneath people." I wiped the mud from her shoe, feeling the heat of humiliation burning my neck. But beneath the anger there was something colder. I was memorizing this moment. I was engraving this feeling into my soul. Because when the time came to destroy them, I wanted to remember exactly how it felt to be on my knees, so I would never have mercy when they were on theirs. I finished and stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. "Good as new," I said quietly. Tiffany smirked and turned back to David. "See, she is trainable. Now, shall we continue the tour? I think my father has some lovely plans to show you." My father chuckled and led the way. David lingered for a second, looking at me with an apology written all over his face. I picked up the heavy bag again and looked at him. My eyes were dry and hard as stone. "Let us go, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "I want to see everything." We walked on, following the family that thought they owned the world, unaware that the woman carrying the bags was already writing their eviction notice in her head. The tour ended near the white gazebo that overlooked the valley, the exact spot where my father planned to build the hospital cafeteria. The sun was high now, beating down on us, and I could see beads of sweat gathering on my father's forehead. It was not just the heat, it was the pressure. Throughout the inspection, David had been relentless. He had asked about the soil erosion patterns, the drainage systems, and the specific migration paths of the local raptors. My father had answered with vague platitudes and charming smiles, but I saw the crack in his armor. He knew he was failing. As we reached the end of the garden path, my father stopped and turned to Tiffany. "Why don't you go check on lunch, dear?" he said, his voice tight. "I need a private word with Mr. Henderson to wrap up the technical details." Tiffany rolled her eyes, clearly bored of the dirt and the humidity. Finally, she sighed. "Try not to take too long, Dad. My champagne is getting warm." She strutted away toward the house, her heels clicking on the stone pavers. I made a move to follow her, keeping my head down and gripping the heavy equipment bag. But my father held up a hand. "Not you," he said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Stay here. Hold the umbrella for Mr. Henderson. The sun is brutal." I stopped. I walked back and stood beside David, opening the large black umbrella I had been carrying. I positioned it over them, casting them in shadow, while I stood in the direct sunlight. I was a prop, a piece of furniture. To my father, I was as inanimate as the gazebo post. My father waited until Tiffany was out of earshot. He took a step closer to David, invading his personal space. The air smelled of expensive cologne mixed with fear. Mr. Henderson. My father began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know there are some complexities with the site. The slopes are steep and the birds are well birds. They can fly somewhere else, right? David remained professional, his face impassive. The environmental regulations are quite strict, Dr. Marcus. Based on what I have seen today, the impact on the local ecosystem would be significant. I will have to note that in my report. My father chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. I saw the bulge there earlier. I knew what was coming. Reports are just paper, David. Can I call you David? He pulled out a thick, creamy white envelope. It was not sealed. I could see the distinct green edge of $100 bills peeking out from the flap. It was thick enough to choke a horse. I am a practical man, my father continued, pressing the envelope against David's chest. And I know that government salaries are not exactly generous. This project is going to save lives, David. It is for the greater good. Whatever hurdles are in the paperwork, I am sure a man of your intelligence can find a way to smooth them over. Consider this a consultation fee. For your trouble. David looked down at the envelope, then up at me. His eyes were wide with shock. He had expected corruption, but the brazenness of it right here in the open was startling. He looked at me for guidance. My father noticed David's glance. He waved a dismissive hand at me, as if swatting away a fly. Oh, do not worry about her. My father laughed, seeing David's hesitation. You can speak freely. My daughter. Well, she is not all there upstairs, if you know what I mean. He tapped his temple, mimicking the gesture Tiffany had made earlier. She is a bit slow. Mildly retarded, the doctors said when she was born. She cleans cages for a living because she likes the repetitive motion. She wouldn't understand a word of what we are discussing even if you drew her a picture. She is basically a mute when she is not talking to dogs. The rage that surged through me was so hot, I thought it would melt the umbrella handle. My own father. He was not just bribing a federal official. He was stripping away my humanity to do it. He was using a lie about my intellect as a shield for his crimes. David stiffened. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped his clipboard. He wanted to punch him. I could see it. I cleared my throat softly, a sound only David would catch, and gave a microscopic nod. Take it. David exhaled slowly. He reached out and took the envelope. I understand, Dr. Marcus. David said, his voice straining to remain level. I will see what I can do to expedite the process. My father beamed. The tension left his shoulders instantly. He clapped David on the back like they were old war buddies. Excellent. I knew you were a reasonable man. We are going to do great things together, David. Great things. He turned to me, his smile fading into a scowl. All right, you can put the umbrella down now. Go wait by the car, and do not drop anything on the way out. I lowered the umbrella. I looked at my father one last time, memorizing the smug satisfaction on his face. He thought he had just bought his future. He thought he had just silenced the law with a stack of cash. As I walked away, trailing behind David toward our SUV, I reached up and adjusted the large, ugly brooch pinned to my lapel. It was not jewelry, it was a high-definition camera lens. I had it all. The audio of him admitting the environmental damage, the video of the cash handoff, and the cherry on top, his derogatory comments about my mental capacity, which would play very well in a courtroom discrimination lawsuit. I climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV. David slid into the driver's side and tossed the envelope onto the dashboard. It landed with a heavy thud. I am so sorry, Director David whispered, his voice shaking with anger. I wanted to strangle him. I picked up the envelope and thumbed through the bills. $10,000. That was the price of his integrity. Do not be sorry, David, I said, looking back at the house where my father stood waving on the porch. Be ready. Because when we get back to the office, I am not just writing a report. I am writing an arrest warrant. I pulled the camera from my lapel and stopped the recording. The little red light blinked off. The trap was not just set. The jaws had already snapped shut. My father was a dead man walking, and he was the one who had dug the grave. Back in the safety of my executive office, I sat before my computer screen with the same precision I used when treating a wounded animal. The trap was set, the bait was laid, and now it was time to pull the string. I opened a generic email template used for administrative updates. I typed the subject line carefully. Notification regarding preliminary document submission for grant application, 4892. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic ambiguity. The body of the email stated that the Marcus Eco Hospital application had successfully passed the initial intake phase and was now moving to the final signature docket. To a lawyer or a careful reader, this meant simply that they had filled out the forms correctly and the paperwork was now sitting in a pile waiting for a decision. It promised nothing. It guaranteed $0. But to a desperate, greedy man like my father and an arrogant spendthrift like my brother, it would read like a winning lottery ticket. I took a deep breath and clicked send. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. Less than 15 minutes later, my phone, which had been silent all morning, began to buzz incessantly. It was not a call. It was a notification from the Brooks family group chat, a digital circle I had been kicked out of and re-added to more times than I could count. I swiped the screen open. It was a photo. My father was holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, the cork already popped foam spilling over his hand. The caption read simply, "Victory." I grabbed my keys. I had to see this in person. I needed to witness the height of their hubris so I could fully appreciate the depth of their fall. When I pulled up to the estate 40 minutes later, the transformation was already underway. The somber, tense atmosphere of the previous day had vanished, replaced by a manic, feverish energy. But the real shock was sitting in the driveway blocking my path to the garage. It was a car, but calling it a car felt like an understatement. It was a McLaren 720S painted a screaming aggressive red that hurt the eyes in the bright sunlight. It still had the dealer plastic on the seats and a temporary paper tag taped to the rear window. I parked my truck on the grass, careful not to get too close to the six-figure machine, and walked toward the house. Trey was already outside pacing around the vehicle with a glass of champagne in one hand and his phone in the other. He was filming it, shouting over the roar of the engine he had left idling. "Look at this beast," he yelled at his phone screen. "This is what success looks like, people. The ink isn't even dry on the contract and we are already upgrading. Brooks' empire taking over." He spotted me walking up the driveway and cut the video. A wide, sloppy grin spread across his face. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world, unaware he was standing on a trapdoor. "Like it?" he asked, gesturing to the car with his glass. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Picked it up an hour ago. I stared at the car. "Trey," I said, keeping my voice low and concerned. "This costs $250,000. Did you pay cash?" He laughed, a sharp barking sound. "Cash is for poor people, Nia. It is called leverage. I put it on the Platinum Business Credit Card. The grant money hits the account in 48 hours. I am just spending my signing bonus a little early." "You bought a supercar on credit based on an email?" I asked. "Not just an email, janitor," he sneered, stroking the hood of the car. "A confirmation." The committee moved us to the signature phase. "That means the check is practically in the mail. Dad said it is a done deal." The front door swung open and my father and Tiffany spilled out, both holding crystal flutes. They looked flushed and euphoric. My father spotted me, and for the first time in years, he did not look at me with disgust. He looked at me with pity. "Nia, glad you stopped by." My father boomed, walking over to inspect Trey's new toy. "We were just celebrating. The hospital is a go. The trust approved us." "Are you sure?" I asked, playing the role of the dim-witted skeptic. "I thought these government things took months." Tiffany stepped forward, giggling. She draped her arm around Trey's shoulder. "Oh, honey, that is for normal people. When you have Dr. Marcus's reputation doors just open, We are already looking at vacation homes in Aspen for the winter. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my simple work clothes. Maybe if you are nice we will let you house sit for us while we are skiing, she added. You are good at cleaning up messes, right? Trey revved the engine of the McLaren, the sound deafening in the quiet afternoon. Hey Nia, he shouted over the noise. Since you are here, grab a bucket and a sponge. The dealer didn't detail the rims properly. I want this thing shining for the signing ceremony tomorrow. I looked at the three of them. My father counting millions he did not have. Trey drowning in debt for a car he could not afford. And Tiffany planning vacations on a budget that existed only in her imagination. They were celebrating their own execution. I smiled a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile. I think I will pass on the car wash, Trey, I said. But congratulations. Really. I hope you enjoy the ride. I turned and walked back to my truck. Where are you going? My father called out. Do not you want a glass of cheap wine? We might have some leftovers in the kitchen. I have work to do, Dad. I called back over my shoulder. Big day tomorrow. I climbed into my truck and drove away, leaving them to their champagne and their delusions. As I turned onto the main road, I checked the time. It was 4 in the afternoon. The banks would close in an hour. Trey had just put a $300,000 liability on a line of credit that was secured by assets I was about to freeze. By this time, tomorrow, that red McLaren would not just be a car, it would be the anchor that dragged him to the bottom of the ocean. And I would be the one cutting the rope. The phone buzzed against the wooden railing of the wolf enclosure, vibrating with a persistence that demanded attention. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. My family had been in a state of manic euphoria since my email went out, sending each other photos of vacation rentals in the French Riviera and potential private jet charters. They were spending money they did not have, banking on a future I had already canceled. I picked up the phone. It was Tiffany. Of course it was. She had been the ringleader of my torment for months, and now that she believed she had won, she wanted to make sure I witnessed her victory lap. Hello, Tiffany, I said, keeping my voice flat and subservient. Oh, good, you answered. She chirped the background noise, suggesting she was in a high-end boutique. I was worried you might be too busy scrubbing floors to pick up. Listen, Nia, I have a proposition for you. A little act of charity on our part. I waited, stroking the fur of the three-legged wolf baron who sat beside me. He sensed my tension and let out a low rumble. We are having the official signing ceremony tomorrow morning at the National Conservation Trust headquarters, she continued, her voice dripping with self-importance. It is going to be a very exclusive event, just the family and the top brass. Dad thinks it is important for everyone to be there. You know, to present a united front. My father did not care about a united front, he cared about having an audience. That is nice of you to invite me. I lied. Well, do not get too excited. She laughed, a sharp sound that grated on my ears. We are not inviting you to sit at the table, obviously. That is for the executives. But we realized we fired our catering staff this morning to free up some cash for Trey's new car insurance. So we are in a bit of a bind. We need someone to hand out the champagne flutes and clear away the hors d'oeuvres. She paused, waiting for the insult to sink in. She was inviting me to the biggest moment of my father's career, not as his daughter, but as the help. I figured since you are already used to cleaning up after animals, cleaning up after rich people should be a step up for you, she said. Plus, we will pay you. Minimum wage, of course. We do not want to spoil you. I closed my eyes, visualizing the boardroom where the meeting would take place. It was my boardroom. The chair at the head of the table was my chair. The audacity of asking me to serve drinks in my own office was so staggering that I almost laughed. So what do you say? She pressed. Come on, Nia. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You will get to see what $50 million actually looks like. You will get to breathe the same air as successful people. It might inspire you to actually do something with your life. She wanted me there to humiliate me. She wanted me to stand in the corner in a cheap uniform while she signed papers that would destroy the land I loved. She wanted to look at me and see envy. I took a deep breath, letting the anger fuel me rather than consume me. This was perfect. If I was not there, the reveal would not be nearly as devastating. I needed to see their faces when the axe fell. "Sure, Tiffany," I said, making my voice sound small and defeated. "I could use the extra cash." "Excellent," she said, and I could practically hear her smirking. "Oh, and Nia, please try to look presentable. Wear black and white, like a proper waitress. We do not want anyone confusing you for a member of the family." I looked down at my muddy boots, then up at the darkening sky. "Don't worry," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "I will be there. And I promise you I will wear the outfit that fits exactly who I am." "Good girl," she said dismissively. "Be there at 9 sharp, and use the service elevator." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at Baron. "Service elevator," I whispered to the wolf. I walked back to my small cottage and went straight to the closet. I pushed aside the flannel shirts and denim jackets. Way in the back, inside a garment bag I hadn't opened in 2 years, was a suit. It was not a waitress uniform. It was a bespoke charcoal gray Italian power suit tailored to perfection, the kind of suit worn by women who demolish companies before breakfast. I ran my hand over the fabric. Tiffany wanted me to dress the part. She wanted me to show everyone who I really was. I smiled in the darkness of my room. Challenge accepted. The morning of the signing ceremony did not begin with the usual routine of scrubbing feed buckets or mending fences. For the first time in years, the animals would have to wait. Today, the predator was me. I left my muddy boots by the back door, a silent monument to the life my family despised, and walked to the hidden safe in the floor of my bedroom closet. Inside lay the keys to a car my father did not know existed, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows that I kept parked in a rented garage 3 miles away. I drove into the heart of Atlanta, the city waking up around me, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. My destination was not the service entrance of a hotel or a supply store, but a discreet, unmarked door on a quiet street in Buckhead. Giovanni's Atelier. It was the kind of place where you did not just walk in, you were invited. As the bell above the door chimed, the smell of Italian leather and steam greeted me. Giovanni, an elderly man with eyes that missed nothing, looked up from his workbench. He did not see a janitor. He did not see a disappointment. He saw his most interesting client. "Dr. Brooks," he said with a warm nod. "You are early." "I am on a schedule today, Giovanni," I replied, my voice already shifting, shedding the soft, apologetic tone I used with my family. "Is it ready?" He did not answer. He simply gestured to a mannequin standing in the center of the fitting room. The suit was a masterpiece of charcoal gray wool, tailored with a precision that bordered on architectural. It was sharp, severe, and undeniably powerful. I took the garments into the changing room and locked the door. As I unbuttoned my flannel shirt and let it drop to the floor, I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. I saw the scars on my arms from handling frightened raccoons and eagles. I saw the calluses on my palms from wielding shovels and rakes. My family looked at these marks and saw failure. They saw a woman who was too stupid to survive in the modern world, a woman who belonged in the dirt. They were so tragically wrong. As I pulled on the silk blouse, cool and smooth against my skin, memories flooded back. I remembered the nights I spent studying for my PhD in the break room of the shelter, reading textbooks by flashlight, so I would not wake the recovering owls. I remembered the day I defended my dissertation on ecosystem preservation. My father thought I was at a dog grooming convention. I had walked out of that university hall as a doctor of environmental science, graduated summa cum laude, and 10 minutes later, I was answering a text from Trey, asking me to pick up his dry cleaning. I fastened the buttons of the trousers. They fit like a second skin. For 5 years, I had lived a double life. By day, I was Nia the janitor, the scapegoat, the punching bag for their insecurities. By night, I was Dr. Brooks, the rising star of the National Conservation Trust, the woman who wrote the policies that developers like my father feared. I had climbed to the top of my field without their money, without their connections, and without their name. I slipped my arms into the blazer. It settled onto my shoulders with a reassuring weight. It felt like armor. I recalled Tiffany's voice from yesterday, dripping with condescension. She had told me to dress like a waitress. She had told me to look presentable so I wouldn't embarrass them. She wanted me to fade into the background, to be the invisible hand that served them champagne while they toasted to their theft of my land. I buttoned the jacket. The transformation was complete. The woman in the mirror was not a janitor. She was not a victim. She was a force of nature. The sharp lines of the suit accentuated my posture, making me look taller, dangerous. My eyes, usually soft with compassion for my animals, were now hard and clear. I reached into my bag and pulled out my ID badge. Director Nia Brooks. I clipped it to the inside of my jacket right over my heart. My family called me a cleaner. They meant it as an insult. They meant I was only good for wiping up their messes. But as I stared at my reflection adjusting the cuffs of my power suit, I realized they were right. I was a cleaner. I cleaned up corruption. I cleaned up fraud. And today I was going to scrub the Brooks family stain off the face of my city. I opened the door and stepped out. Giovanni nodded approvingly. "You look like you are going to war, Doctor," he said. I smiled, and it was the coldest thing in the room. "No, Giovanni. The war is already over. Today is just the execution." I checked my watch. It was time. I turned back to the mirror for one last look. The janitor was gone. The director had arrived. "It is time to take out the trash," I whispered. The headquarters of the National Conservation Trust stood in the center of the financial district, like a shard of blue glass piercing the sky. It was a cathedral of commerce and policy, a place where billion-dollar decisions were made in hushed tones behind soundproof glass. I arrived 10 minutes before 9 and parked my black sedan in the reserved underground spot marked simply with the number 1. I took the private lift to the lobby level, stepping out behind the security turnstiles to watch the arrival of my guests. I did not have to wait long. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I saw the aggressive red snout of Trey's new McLaren pull up to the curb in the no-parking zone. A valet rushed out to tell him he could not leave the car there, but Trey simply tossed the keys at the man's chest and walked away without looking back. My father and Tiffany stepped out of a hired limousine behind him. They looked like they were attending a royal wedding. Tiffany was wearing a white dress that was far too evening wear for a morning meeting, and my father was in a pinstripe suit that screamed new money. They swept into the lobby, their voices echoing off the marble walls, instantly disrupting the hushed professional atmosphere. I stood behind a large pillar near the security desk, watching them approach the reception counter. "Excuse me," Tiffany said, snapping her fingers at the young receptionist. "We are the Brooks party. We are here to see the director. And please tell him to hurry. We have a lunch reservation at 12. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who I had hired personally for her patients, smiled politely. "Director Brooks is expecting you," she said. "If you could please take a seat, someone will come to collect you shortly." My father scoffed, checking his gold watch. "Take a seat. Do you know who I am? I am Dr. Marcus Brooks. I am the reason this building has lights on today. I demand to be taken up immediately." It was fascinating to watch them. They treated the people who actually ran the building like furniture, assuming that their imaginary wealth gave them the right to dictate the schedule of a federal agency. I adjusted my blazer and stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked across the lobby floor, the click of my heels sharp and authoritative. "You are early," I said, my voice cutting through their complaints. They spun around. For a second there was silence. They looked at the charcoal suit, the silk blouse, the way I held myself. For a brief moment I saw confusion in my father's eyes, a flicker of recognition that perhaps he had misjudged the situation. But then his arrogance overrode his instincts. "Well, look at you," Tiffany laughed, breaking the tension. I told you to dress like a waitress, Nia, not an undertaker. But at least you look clean. Did you find the service entrance okay? She assumed I had come from the back. She assumed the suit was a cheap attempt to blend in. I did not answer her. I looked at my father. The meeting is on the 42nd floor, I said. You should probably head up. My father sneered. We know where the meeting is. We are just waiting for someone important to escort us. We are not going to ride up with the janitorial staff. He turned his back on me, dismissing me completely. Fine, I said. I will see you up there. I turned and walked toward the bank of elevators, but I did not walk toward the 6 main elevators that the general staff and visitors used. I walked past them toward the single gold doors at the far end of the hall. Above the doors, a discreet sign read, Executive Access Only. Trey noticed where I was going. He broke away from the group and jogged after me. Hey, where do you think you are going? He called out, his voice echoing in the lobby. That is the VIP lift, you idiot. The freight elevator is around the corner. I ignored him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keycard. I tapped it against the sensor. The panel beeped green and the heavy gold doors slid open smoothly. Trey picked up his pace, running now. He thought I was making a mistake. He thought I was going to embarrass the family by setting off an alarm or getting yelled at by security. Nia, stop, he shouted, reaching out to grab my shoulder. You are going to get us kicked out. Get away from that door. Just as his hand was inches from my fabric, a massive figure stepped into his path. It was Michael, the head of building security, a former linebacker who took his job very seriously. Michael did not say a word. He simply placed a hand on Trey's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks like he had hit a brick wall. Trey stumbled back, gasping. Hey, watch it, pal. Do you know who I am? I am the guest of honor here. That woman is with me. She is confused. I am just trying to. Michael ignored Trey completely. He turned his head slightly toward me while keeping his arm barred across Trey's path. He did not look at me like I was a janitor. He looked at me with the deference one gives to a commander-in-chief. Good morning, ma'am, Michael said, his voice deep and respectful. The boardroom is prepped for you. Thank you, Michael, I replied calmly. Please ensure these guests find their way to the waiting room and check them for recording devices. We cannot be too careful. I stepped into the elevator. Trey stood there, his mouth hanging open, looking from Michael to me. He was trying to process what had just happened. Why did the guard stop him, the man in the $3,000 suit, but bow to the woman he thought cleaned cages for a living? His narcissism provided the answer. He assumed I had lied. He assumed I had tricked the guard or stolen a pass. You are going to jail, Nia! He screamed as the doors began to close. You are sneaking in. I am telling Dad. I stood in the center of the elevator, watching his face turn red with impotent rage through the narrowing gap. He still didn't get it. He thought I was breaking the rules. He didn't realize I wrote them. The doors shut with a soft final click, cutting off his shouting. The elevator began its silent, rapid ascent. I checked my reflection in the polished brass paneling one last time. I looked composed. I looked ready. By the time they made it through security and took the slow elevator up, I would be sitting at the head of the table. And when those doors opened again, they would finally understand that they had not been invited to a celebration. They had been invited to a trial. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a vast soundproof chamber of glass and polished mahogany, suspended high above the city like a cloud. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta looked like a toy set, small and insignificant. This was a room designed to make you feel small unless you were the one sitting at the head of the table. My father, Dr. Marcus, had naturally claimed that seat the moment they walked in. He sat with his arms crossed, tapping his fingers against the glossy wood surface, a rhythm of irritation that grew faster with every passing minute. It had been 20 minutes since the security guard had escorted them here and left them with a curt nod. No one had come in to offer them coffee. No one had brought water. There was only the low, ambient hum of the air conditioning and the oppressive silence of the empty room. This is ridiculous, my father muttered, checking his gold Rolex for the 10th time. Do they know who I am? I have surgery scheduled for this afternoon. I cannot be kept waiting like a common patient. Trey was spinning idly in one of the leather executive chairs, his feet propped up on the edge of the multi-$1,000 conference table. He looked bored, but underneath the boredom, there was a vibrating energy of greed. Relax, Dad, Trey said, looking up at the ceiling. They are probably just printing the check. You know how slow these government types are. Besides, let them take their time. The longer they take, the more interest we accumulate, right? He laughed at his own joke, a hollow sound that bounced off the glass walls. Tiffany was not laughing. She was standing by the window looking down at the street, but her eyes were darting around the room with growing unease. She was the most perceptive of the three, the one most attuned to social hierarchies, and something about the atmosphere in the building was bothering her. "Does it feel strange to you?" she asked, turning back to the table. The receptionist downstairs. She didn't smile at me. She barely even looked at me. And that security guard, the big one. He looked at us like we were intruders. My father waved his hand dismissively. You are being paranoid, Tiffany. They are just intimidated. They are bureaucrats. They see a family like ours successful, attractive, powerful, and they freeze up. It is envy, plain and simple. Tiffany frowned, but sat down next to Trey. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the table, her fingers brushing against a small black disc embedded in the center. She assumed it was a speaker for conference calls. She did not know it was a high-fidelity omnidirectional microphone, and that 3 rooms away I was listening to every breath she took. So Trey said, leaning forward and lowering his voice, though there was no one else in the room, $50 million. It hits the account tomorrow, right? 48 hours, my father corrected him, his mood lifting instantly at the mention of the money. Once I sign the grant acceptance today, the wire transfer is automatic. 50 million. Trey whistled. And the hospital construction is estimated at what, 30? My father winked. On paper, it is 30. But with the contractors I have lined up and the materials we are actually going to use, we can get the shell built for 20. Maybe 18 if we cut corners on the waste disposal systems. Trey grinned, slapping the table. That leaves 30 million in pure profit. That is a lot of leftovers, Dad. It is for administrative costs, my father said smoothly, using the legal term to cover his theft, and for compensating the leadership team for their vision. I was thinking, Trey continued, his eyes glazing over with lust for material things. We don't really need to break ground until the fall, right? That gives us a solid 3 months. I found a listing for a yacht in Miami. The Sea Witch. It is 60 feet long, has a jacuzzi on the deck. We could classify it as a mobile research vessel for the hospital, write the whole thing off as a business expense. My father nodded thoughtfully. A mobile research vessel. I like the sound of that. We could use it to study marine life, or at least study the cocktail menu in the Bahamas. They both laughed, the sound ugly and conspiratorial. And the Aspen House, Tiffany chimed in, her anxiety momentarily forgotten at the prospect of spending money. I found a villa near the slopes. It has 7 bedrooms and a heated driveway. We could put it under the foundation's name as a corporate retreat center. Excellent idea, my father agreed. We need a place to recharge. Saving the planet is exhausting work after all. He leaned back, putting his hands behind his head. You know, he said, staring at the ceiling. I was worried about that girl, Nia. I thought she might try to stir up trouble with the land deed, but she is too simple. She doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She is a doormat, Trey scoffed. She is probably downstairs right now, squeezing into a waitress uniform, hoping we will tip her. Actually, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I told her the pay was minimum wage. She didn't even argue. It is sad, really. Some people are just born to serve. My father sighed, a sound of deep, satisfied contentment. Well, here's to us, he said, raising an imaginary glass. To the visionaries. We take the money. We build a nice-looking facade, and if the hospital fails in a few years because the foundation cracks or the water is bad, well, we will have already cashed out. The government can deal with the cleanup. I sat in my office watching the audio waveforms spike on my monitor as they confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. They had just admitted on a federal recording that they intended to misuse government funds for personal luxury. They had admitted the hospital was a scam. They had admitted they planned to cut corners on safety. The evidence was undeniable. It was over. I stood up from my desk. I smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer. I picked up the thick file folder containing the eviction notice, the frozen asset confirmation, and the arrest warrants. Back in the boardroom, the silence had returned, but now it was thick with arrogance. They sat there, three vultures waiting to be fed, completely unaware that the meal was poisoned. Finally, the heavy double doors at the far end of the room began to hum. The sound of the magnetic locks disengaging echoed in the quiet space like the cocking of a gun. My father sat up straight, buttoning his jacket. Finally, he announced, "The director is here. Show some respect, Trey. We want this money released today." Trey wiped the smirk off his face. Tiffany sat up taller, practicing her charming smile. All three of them turned their eyes toward the entrance, expecting a gray-haired bureaucrat they could manipulate, charm, and deceive. The massive mahogany doors swung open slowly, revealing the figure standing in the corridor. They did not see a stranger. They did not see a friend. They saw their reckoning. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a smooth hydraulic hiss that sounded like a vacuum seal being broken. I stepped across the threshold, my Italian leather heels sinking soundlessly into the plush navy carpet. The air inside the boardroom was cooler than the hallway, smelling of lemon polish and recycled corporate oxygen. For a heartbeat, the three people sitting around the table did not react. They were too busy laughing at some joke my father had just made, likely about how he planned to spend the government's money. Then the laughter died. It did not taper off politely. It was severed, cut short, as if someone had pulled the plug on a radio. My father turned in his chair, a smile still half frozen on his face. When his eyes landed on me, the smile didn't just vanish, it curdled. He blinked once, then twice, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual information in front of him. He was looking for Nia the janitor, Nia in the muddy boots and oversized flannel shirt. Instead, he was looking at a woman in a $4,000 charcoal power suit, her hair slicked back in a severe commanding bun, holding a leather portfolio like a weapon. Trey dropped his feet from the table. The heavy thud of his loafers hitting the floor echoed in the silence. Tiffany's mouth opened slightly, her eyes darting up and down my outfit, likely trying to calculate the cost of the fabric. I did not say a word. I did not nod. I did not smile. I walked past them. I moved with a slow, predatory grace, ignoring their presence entirely. I walked past the empty chairs along the side of the table. I walked past the pitcher of water and the crystal glasses. I walked all the way to the head of the table, to the massive high-backed leather chair that faced the window overlooking the city. My father's face turned a deep mottled red. "Nia," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" I ignored him. I placed my portfolio on the table. I pulled out the chair. It was heavy, substantial. I sat down, settling into the leather, and crossed my legs. I placed my hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and looked at them. My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Get up," he snapped, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Have you lost your mind? This is a federal meeting, you stupid girl. The director of the trust is going to walk through those doors any second. If he sees you sitting in his chair playing dress-up, he will have you arrested. And this time I won't bail you out." Trey laughed nervously, looking at the door as if expecting security to burst in. "Seriously? Nia, get out of the chair," he said. "You look ridiculous. Did you rent that suit for a job interview? You are embarrassing us. Go wait in the hallway." Tiffany leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She was starting to realize something was wrong. She noticed that the suit wasn't a rental. She noticed the way I sat not like a guest, but like an owner. "Nia," she said slowly. "Why are you here? I told you to use the service entrance." "Where are the drinks?" I looked at Tiffany. I looked at Trey. Finally, I locked eyes with my father. "You are waiting for the director," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and filled the room without me having to raise it. "Yes," obviously my father spat, checking his watch again. "And you are sitting in his seat. Move. Now." I did not move. I reached into my portfolio. The sound of the zipper opening was the only noise in the room. "You are waiting for the person who reviews the grant applications." I continued. "You are waiting for the person who decides if your hospital gets built or if it remains a fantasy. You are waiting for the person who controls the $50 million you have already spent." I pulled out a heavy object wrapped in velvet. My father's eyes widened. He stopped breathing. I unwrapped the object and placed it on the table with a solid, heavy thud. It was a crystal nameplate, the edges beveled to catch the light. The letters were etched in gold. Dr. Nia Brooks, Executive Director, National Conservation Trust. I spun the nameplate around so it faced them. I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of absolute authority. "Sit down, Dr. Marcus," I commanded. "You are already in the presence of the director. And you are sitting in my room." The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was heavy. It was the sound of 3 worlds colliding with reality and shattering into a million pieces. My father looked at the nameplate. He looked at me. He looked back at the nameplate. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. "You," he whispered. It was a sound of pure horror. "Me," I replied. Trey stood up, his face pale. "No. No way. This is a joke. You are a janitor. You clean up poop. You cannot run a federal agency." "Dad, tell her to stop lying." I picked up the remote control for the room's media system and pressed a button. The massive screen on the wall behind me flickered to life. The logo of the National Conservation Trust appeared, followed by my official biography and photo. Dr. Nia Brooks, the text read, PhD in Environmental Science, Yale University, appointed Executive Director 2021. I turned back to them. "I do not just clean up animal waste." "Trey," I said coldly. "I clean up environmental hazards. I clean up toxic spills. And today I am cleaning up the biggest fraud that has ever crossed my desk." My father collapsed back into his chair. His legs gave out. He looked small. He looked old. "You," he stammered again. You have been watching us. I have been auditing you, Dad," I corrected him. "And I have seen everything." I opened the file folder in front of me. "Now," I said, flipping open the first page, "let us talk about why you are never going to see a single dime of that money. And let us talk about why you might want to call a lawyer instead of a contractor." The trap had snapped shut. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the keys. My father opened his mouth to speak, likely to weave another desperate lie, or to demand I explain myself, but I raised my hand. It was a sharp, commanding gesture that silenced him instantly. The time for their words was over. This room, this building, and this moment belonged entirely to me. "I do not want to hear your explanations, Dad," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I do not want to hear your apologies, and I certainly do not want to hear your excuses. You came here today for a verdict. You came here to see if your grant was approved. So let us look at the supporting evidence." I picked up the sleek silver remote control from the table. I pointed it at the massive screen behind me, the one that covered nearly the entire wall. "Exhibit A," I announced. "Character assessment." I pressed a button. The high-definition screen flickered to life. It was not a spreadsheet or a graph. It was a video. Specifically, it was the live stream Tiffany had broadcasted from my shelter. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the boardroom's surround sound system. Tiffany's voice, shrill and mocking, filled the air. It is basically a slum for raccoons, the digital Tiffany sneered on screen. It smells like wet dog and failure. Then the video cut to the moment she kicked the bucket of fish, laughing as the food scattered in the dirt. I paused the video on her smiling face. I looked at the real Tiffany sitting at the table. Her face had drained of all color. She gripped her designer handbag until her knuckles turned white. I was just joking, she stammered, her voice trembling. It was just content for social media. Nia, you know I didn't mean it. I did not answer her. I simply pressed the next button. Exhibit B, I said. Threat assessment. The screen went black, but the audio remained. A waveform appeared, spiking with every syllable. It was the phone call from yesterday. Trey's voice boomed through the room, loud and aggressive. You have until tomorrow morning to send me a draft, or else the only thing your animals will be drinking is antifreeze. Trey flinched as if he had been slapped. He sank lower in his chair, looking frantically at the door, realizing that every word had been recorded. That is illegal wiretapping, he shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. You cannot use that. It was a private conversation. I leaned forward. When you threaten to contaminate a federally protected water source to blackmail a government official, Trey, there is no such thing as a private conversation. That is a confession to a felony. I turned to my father. He was staring at the table, refusing to look at the screen. He knew what was coming next. And finally, I said softly, Exhibit C, bribery and corruption. I played the footage from the button camera. The angle was low, looking up from my lapel, but the picture was perfect. It showed my father standing in his garden, the sun shining on his face. It showed him pulling out the thick white envelope. It showed him pressing it against David's chest. Consider this a consultation fee, the recording played. And then the part that made the air in the room turn to ice. My daughter. She is mildew retarded. She cleans cages for a living. The video ended. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father looked broken. The arrogance that had defined him for my entire life had evaporated, leaving behind a small, frightened old man caught in his own trap. You called me a janitor, I said, breaking the silence. I stood up and walked slowly around the table until I was standing right behind him. He did not dare to turn around. You told everyone who would listen that I was nothing more than hired help. You laughed at me for working with trash. You mocked me for getting my hands dirty. I walked back to the head of the table and picked up the thick file folder containing his grant application. I held it up so they could all see it. Well, Dad, you were right, I declared, my voice ringing with steel. I am a janitor. I dropped the file onto the table. It landed with a heavy final thud. And today I am performing my most important duty. I am cleaning up the trash. I am scrubbing the corruption, the greed and the filth that people like you bring into my industry. I am sanitizing this agency of your presence. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a heavy rubber stamp. It was not the standard blue ink stamp used for routine denials. It was the red ink stamp, the one reserved for blacklisted entities. My father watched the stamp in my hand. He looked like he wanted to cry, to beg, to scream, but he was paralyzed by the sheer weight of his own failure. I brought the stamp down on the cover of the file. Bang! The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I lifted the stamp, revealing the bright red letters that bled into the paper. Permanently rejected. I looked at them, my eyes cold and hard. Your application is denied, Dr. Brooks. Your funding is zero, and your hospital project is dead. Now get out of my office before I have security throw you out with the rest of the garbage. I did not stop there. The sound of the red stamp hitting the paper was still echoing in the room when I reached for the landline phone on the conference table. I did not look at my father, who was staring at the red letters in shock. I simply pressed the speed dial button for the bank liaison officer. I put it on speaker so they could hear every word. A voice answered immediately. Hello, Director Brooks. How can we help you today? I leaned into the microphone. Hello, James. I am calling to officially notify First National Bank that the Marcus Eco Hospital grant application has been rejected with prejudice due to documented fraud. Please initiate the clawback protocols for any bridge loans secured against this application immediately. There was a brief pause on the line before James replied. Understood, Director. We are freezing the credit lines and issuing a margin call on the collateral now. Thank you for the update. I hung up. The silence in the room broke instantly as my father's personal cell phone began to ring. It was a shrill, aggressive sound that seemed to slice through his composure. He looked at the screen and his face turned the color of ash. "It is the bank," he whispered. He answered it with a trembling hand. "Hello, this is Dr. Marcus." "Yes." "What?" "What do you mean immediate repayment? I can explain. The grant is just delayed." "No, you cannot take the house. That is my primary residence." I watched as he listened to the voice on the other end. He slumped against the table as if the bones had been removed from his body. "They are calling the loan," he gasped, looking at Trey with eyes full of terror. "They are calling the $2 million bridge loan. They are sending agents to seize the clinic assets. They are putting a lien on the estate." Trey stood up, panic widening his eyes. He pulled out his own phone, which had started buzzing with a relentless stream of notifications. "Oh God," he stammered, swiping at his screen frantically. "The credit cards. They are all declining. American Express just canceled the black card. The dealership just emailed me. They are reporting the McLaren as stolen because the financing fell through. They are tracking the GPS to tow it right now." And then the chaos truly began. Tiffany, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly let out a scream that sounded more animal than human. She turned on Trey, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. The elegant facade she had maintained for years cracked and fell away, revealing the mercenary underneath. "You told me it was a done deal," she shrieked, shoving him hard in the chest. "You told me to buy the tickets to Aspen. You told me to put the down payment on the villa. You told me we were rich." Trey stumbled back, knocking over a crystal pitcher of water. It shattered on the floor, soaking his shoes. "I did not know she was the director," he yelled back, his voice cracking. "It is not my fault. It is your fault, too. You are the one who spent $50,000 on clothes yesterday. You are the one who needed a new wardrobe for the signing ceremony." Tiffany lunged at him, grabbing the lapels of his expensive linen suit. "I married you for security," she screamed, shaking him violently. "I did not sign up for bankruptcy. I did not sign up to be poor. You are a loser, Trey. You are a broke loser just like your father." My father slammed his fist on the table, his face purple with rage. "Shut up," he roared. "Both of you shut up. Do you not understand what is happening? We are losing everything. My stock portfolio, the clinic, the house. It is all tied to that loan." He turned to me, his eyes wild with desperation. He reached out a hand across the table, the same hand that had thrown $50 in the mud the night before. "Nia, please, you have to call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you stamped the wrong file. You are destroying your own family." I sat back in my leather chair, watching them tear each other apart. They looked like rats on a sinking ship, biting and clawing over the last scrap of wood. I crossed my arms. "I am not destroying this family, Dad," I said calmly. "I am just balancing the books. You spent years treating me like a liability. Now you are finally seeing what a real liability looks like." The chaos in the boardroom was silenced not by my voice, but by the heavy authoritative thud of the double doors swinging open for the third time that morning. This time, however, there was no deference in the movement. A dozen men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI stormed into the room. They moved with a synchronized precision that made my family's earlier bickering look like a playground squabble. My father froze. His hand was still gripping his phone, the bank liaison shouting unheard threats on the other end. Trey dropped into his chair, his face losing the last draining remnants of color. Tiffany stopped screaming, her mouth hanging open as she stared at the badges flashing in the harsh office light. Dr. Marcus Brooks, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming off the glass walls. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bribery of a federal official, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement against the United States government. My father blinked, his brain unable to comprehend the reality crashing down on him. Arrest, he whispered. No. You have made a mistake. I am Dr. Marcus Brooks. I am a pillar of this community. Step away from the table and put your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. My father turned to me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror I had never seen in him before. For 30 years, this man had been a god in his own universe. He controlled the money, he controlled the narrative, and he controlled me. Now, watching the agents advance, he realized his universe had shrunk down to the size of a prison cell. Nia, he gasped, stumbling toward me. Tell them who I am. You are the director. You can stop this. Call them off. He reached out, grabbing the sleeve of my charcoal blazer. The agent stepped in immediately, grabbing my father's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and final. It was the loudest sound in the world. My father struggled against the restraint, turning his head to look at me, tears streaming down his face. Nia, please, he begged, his voice cracking into a sob. I am your father. I am your daddy. You cannot let them take me. You cannot do this to your own blood. The room went still. The agents paused, looking at me, perhaps expecting the daughter to crack, to weep, to ask for leniency. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve where he had touched it, brushing it off as if he had left a stain. I walked around the table until I was standing inches from him. I looked into the eyes that had looked down on me with contempt for my entire life. I leaned in close, so close that I could smell the fear sweating through his expensive cologne. Did you forget, Dad? I whispered, my voice soft and deadly. I am just a janitor. I am just the girl who cleans up animal filth. I have no power here. I pulled back and looked at the agent. Take him away. As they dragged my father toward the door, his legs dragging uselessly across the carpet, the lead agent turned his attention to the corner of the room. Tiffany Brooks, he said. Tiffany jumped, pressing her back against the window, as if she could phase through the glass and float away. Me, she shrieked. I didn't do anything. I am just the daughter-in-law. I just signed where they told me to sign. I don't know anything about business. The agent held up a plastic bag containing a stack of invoices. We have your signature on 20 separate falsified vendor contracts, Mrs. Brooks. You are listed as the treasurer for the shell company used to launder the initial loan deposits. You are under arrest for aiding and abetting and fraud. No, she screamed as a female officer grabbed her arm. My shoes, you are hurting me. Nia, help me. I invited you here. I gave you a job. You tried to make me a servant, Tiffany, I said, watching her struggle. Now you are going to serve time. Trey sat alone at the table, watching his wife and father being hauled away. He was shaking so hard the chair was vibrating. He looked at me, waiting for his name to be called. The agent looked at Trey, then at me. We are still processing the evidence on the son, the agent said to me. We will be back for him. I looked at Trey. He was crying silent, terrified tears. He was not going to jail today, but he was going home to an empty house, a seized bank account, and a stolen car that was about to be towed. I nodded to the agent. Take the trash out first. We will come back for the dust later. I turned back to the window, watching the city below as the elevator doors closed on my family, sealing them into the nightmare they had created for themselves. The boardroom was quiet again. It was finally clean. The morning mist was lifting off the Blue Ridge Mountains, revealing a sky of piercing, limitless blue. It had been exactly 30 days since the doors of the elevator closed on my screaming family, and the silence they left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stood at the entrance of the sanctuary, but the rusted gate was gone. In its place stood a sturdy new sign funded by the federal grant I had reallocated to the Rightful Preservation Project. It read, National Wildlife Protected Zone. Violators will be prosecuted. I took a sip of my coffee, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth. For years, this smell had represented my shame. My family had programmed me to believe that dirt was a sign of failure, that working with my hands meant I was lesser than. But as I looked out over the 10 acres of lush green forest that was now legally untouchable, I realized they were wrong. Dirt was not failure. Dirt was the foundation of everything that grew. My phone chimed in my pocket. I pulled it out, not with the dread I used to feel, but with a detached curiosity. It was a news alert. The headline was simple and devastating. Local plastic surgeon stripped of medical license amidst federal investigation. My father, the great Dr. Marcus, was no longer a doctor. He was just Mr. Brooks, now an elderly man facing millions of dollars in fines and a potential prison sentence. The bank had seized the estate last week. I heard through the grapevine that he was staying in a motel off the highway, the kind of place he used to mock when we drove past it. As for the golden couple, the facade had crumbled the moment the credit cards were cut. Trey and Tiffany filed for divorce 3 days after the arrest. It turns out their love was entirely conditional on a bank balance. Trey was currently living in a friend's basement, buried under the debt of a McLaren he could not pay for, and legal fees he could not afford. Tiffany had vanished, likely hunting for a new host to attach herself to. They had tried to consume me, but in the end, they had only consumed themselves. I put the phone away. They were ghosts now, fading into the background of a story that no longer centered on them. I walked over to the main enclosure. Apollo, the bald eagle whose wing had been shattered 3 months ago, was waiting. Today was the day. I opened the cage door and extended my arm, covered in a thick leather gauntlet. Apollo hopped onto my wrist, his talons gripping the leather, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. He was heavy, powerful, and majestic. He had been broken, ground down, and trapped, but he had healed. I walked him out to the center of the clearing. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees that would never be bulldozed for a parking lot. I felt the tension in Apollo's body. He knew. He could feel the sky calling him. For 30 years, I had been the scapegoat. I had been the janitor. I had been the one they kept in the shadows to clean up their messes. They thought that because I served, I was a servant. They forgot that the person who holds the broom is also the person who decides what gets thrown away. I lifted my arm high. "Go," I whispered. Apollo spread his massive wings. With a powerful thrust, he launched himself into the air. I watched him rise higher and higher, catching the thermal currents circling once above my head, as if to say thank you, before turning toward the mountains and disappearing into the light. I stood there for a long time, my arms still raised, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my life. I was not the black sheep. I was not the disappointment. I was the guardian of this land. I was Dr. Nia Brooks, and I had built a legacy, not of concrete and lies, but of life and truth. I turned back to the shelter. There were cages to clean. There were animals to feed. There was work to be done. And for the first time, I walked toward it with my head held high, knowing that every piece of filth I scrubbed away made the world a little bit brighter. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been told you are nothing, remember this. The people who make the mess always think they are above the people who clean it. But they are wrong. Never underestimate the person who is cleaning up your mess. Because one day, if you are not careful, they might just decide to clean up you. Nia's journey teaches us that true power does not roar, it observes. Her family was so blinded by their arrogance and obsession with status that they failed to recognize the strength standing right in front of them. They equated dirt with failure, forgetting that it is the foundation upon which everything real is built. Integrity will always outlast a facade, and the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how much money is thrown at it. Your worth is defined by your character, never by the limited perception of those who cannot see your light. If this story inspired you to stand in your truth, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their time to soar is coming.